Number 1. Root Cellar. I used to explore a lot in the hills, around the area I grew up. This happened in the days before the internet, so there was a lot less to do back then. I rarely found anything interesting when I went out. Most of the stuff out there was just trees, bushes, vines, shrubs, and prickly plants that I almost inevitably got stuck in my hand at some point. The only time I came across something scary, though, is when I was on some property that I really shouldn't have been on. It was a really old farmhouse that I had seen many times before. I just never was brave enough to go on it myself. But on this day, I was really looking for something new to do. I didn't go into the house itself. It had been abandoned for a really long time, and when I went up on the porch, I almost fell down through it. I didn't want to risk getting seriously hurt, because the floor inside could have been a lot worse. Exploring the yard and area between the house and an old barn, I was planning on going into the barn. But then, I saw something off to the side that caught my eye. When I went to check it out, I realized that I had found the door to an old root cellar. Our area was known for tornadoes too, so it might have been used for shelter back in the day. I got pretty excited. There was a lock on the cellar door, but it was so old and decayed wood that I was able to break it off pretty easily. I kept looking around to make sure no one was coming, even though that was unlikely. It was no surprise that the cellar was really dark. There was a lantern in there, but it didn't have any fuel in it. It had probably dried up in the years that no one had been in the cellar. Fortunately, since I explored old buildings, I always carried a pen light with me for just such occasions. There were plenty of old jars still in the cellar. Many of them were full of discolored goo that was likely produce that had been down there for decades, but the majority of them were empty or broken. I looked at several of them, and they were so bad that I couldn't make anything out. There was a table and chair in one corner of the room. I noticed that there were several really old books on the desk. Looking at one, I could tell it was a log, but it was so warped and destroyed by decades of wetness and humidity that I couldn't even get the pages apart, much less see anything that was written on those pages. As I kept looking through the cellar, I eventually came across something that I hadn't expected. There was something in one of the corners of the cellar. It was hard to see, even with the pen light, but as I got closer, I realized what it was. There were human remains in the cellar. They had obviously been down there for a very long time, too, but the bones weren't together, but more of a loose pile. But the skull alone was enough to show me that they were indeed human. At first, although it was scary, I wasn't terrified to find this. I mean, someone might have stumbled upon the root cellar long before I did, and accidentally got bitten by a snake, or died in some other way. But then, the horror of what I had actually stumbled upon finally occurred to me. This farmhouse had been abandoned for decades. My family had no idea who had lived there before, but the scariest part was, I remembered when I found the door to the cellar, there was a lock on the door that I had to break off. That meant, whoever this person was, they had been locked in that cellar against their will. That meant that they were left to die in the cellar, alone. My mind started wondering what happened. I mean, many of the jars had been empty and opened. The food may have sustained the person down there for a long period of time, but eventually, either it went bad, and he couldn't eat it anymore, or something else had happened in order for him to have died. Whatever it was, though, the very fact that I'd come across a locked cellar told me he was murdered. This story took place in the 70s when I was a teenager. I told my dad what I had found, and had gotten yelled at pretty bad for trespassing on property. I asked if we should call the police, and he told me he would take care of it, and then he grounded me for like a month. In the decades following this, I've often thought about what I had found. I moved away from there in the late 70s, and my parents eventually sold their house. I have tried to find news stories about what had happened, but I have never been able to. I seriously doubt my dad ever called the police, and I sometimes wonder if that body is still in that root cellar where I left it. Number 2. The Shack. I go looking for places in the middle of nowhere, forgotten by time. Usually I find these things in the mountains, or in the forests, or places like that. Several times I have found some interesting things. However, the most interesting might also be the scariest that I'd ever come across. It was not too unusual for hermits around the area that I lived in to live in shacks way out in the woods. I even had a family member who was like this. He just hated to be around people, and he lived completely off the land, in a little shack that he had built himself. Normally, if I came across a place like that when I was out exploring, I would completely avoid it. But once, when I was out hunting actually, I came across an old shack in the woods. It shouldn't have been there because my dad owned the property that I was hunting on, but also it looked like it had been there for a really long time, so it's probably abandoned. I decided I was interested in checking it out. When it comes to hermits, you have to be careful. Many times, they didn't take great care of themselves, so it was possible someone was still living there. Cautiously, I walked up and looked in the windows of the place. There was no glass in the window, but there was a board in front of it, which I tried to move to the side as quietly as possible. When I did, all I could see is that it was really dark in the little shack, but it definitely was not occupied. Going to the door, it opened easily. There was a hook lock on the inside, and it was pretty rusted through. The place itself stank of mold and mildew, which just made me believe even more that the place was abandoned. Inside, I noticed something really weird. There were tons of taxidermied animals inside of the small place. Some were heads of animals on the wall, while others were sitting on tables and such. As I stepped further in, I noticed that there were also tons of little bones on the floor, as if they were the animal bones, strewn all over the place. It was creepy as hell. But even worse, over in the corner of the room, there were old and nasty blankets that were probably set up as a sleeping area. I noticed there were little models of things that were also made of animal bones. For example, there were some stick figures made up of bones and tied together with weeds laying on the floor. There were other things, drawings on the walls as well. They were familiar to me as witchcrafty sort of things. And no, I don't mean like Wiccans or anything. There are some people out there who are involved in dark things, not just appreciating nature. And everything that I was seeing in this place didn't look like it belonged to the good sort of witches. They looked evil, and they looked terrifying, and it made me wonder about the sanity of whoever lived there. I began looking around at the heads that were on the wall. The one thing I noticed about them was that they weren't as old as I originally assumed they were, but they were covered in dust too, which meant whoever had stayed there hadn't been there in forever to clean up, and that made me feel a lot better about being in there. I was pretty disturbed by the whole thing and decided to leave. However, I didn't get very far away from that shack before I heard a twig snap behind me. I had been on edge because of what I had seen, so I jumped and I turned around. What I saw is etched in my mind forever. It was the strangest looking person, so strange that I couldn't even be sure if it was a person. They were huge, hunched over, and dragging one of their feet behind them. As I watched now from behind a tree, they approached the shack, and then went into it. I immediately ran after that. I had been in that shack, and barely missed this person on the way back. From what I saw inside that place, I definitely didn't want to be caught by them. Number 3. Camper. When I would go out for walks when I was a kid, I always did them alone. I liked the feeling of being by myself, just walking along the road. It was the best way for me to really get lost in my thoughts, and it would inspire me to write when I was younger. I was fortunate to grow up in an area in which my family owned a lot of property. There were cows grazing on the hills and plenty of rolls of hay out there. I had sometimes been required to go out there and unleash the hay, so it would roll down the hills, and the cows would come running for their dinner. But other than that, there wasn't really anything around there. As my family owned most of the property out in those hills, there weren't other houses. My family home was on top of a hill, and I would walk along the gravel roads, just marveling at the nature. I don't recall why I was walking out that day, but I was really depressed for some reason. Because of that, I eventually traveled off of the property that we owned. The road led me to a place that I had never been before, but I really didn't care. I was just walking on the side of the road. Eventually I came up to something that interested me though. There was a really small trailer on the side of the road. It was in this tiny little nook and almost was in the road itself. It was one of those small trailers that you would hook up to a pickup truck and pull around. But there was no truck there, and the thing looked so old and uncared for that I thought it was probably abandoned. I got curious about it, and after I decided no one could possibly be living there, I thought I would take a look inside it. However, when I tried to get in, using the latch on the door, it was firmly locked. I couldn't get it to open. The windows on the side facing the street had blinds in them, so I was unable to peek in and see what was inside. There didn't seem to be a lot of room on the opposite side, but enough that I could probably squeeze in and get a look inside it if there were no blinds in the windows back there. When I got around to the back side of the place, I noticed that one of the windows was actually open. But that wasn't all that I noticed. There was a ghastly smell that I began smelling before I even got to the window. It was almost too disgusting for me to get anywhere close to the window in order to look inside. Still, I was curious, and I was able to look in the window inside the tiny camper and see what smelled so horrible in there. I still wish that I hadn't. There were piles of bones and skins inside the thing, which I assumed were animal bodies, and they were just piled on top of each other in disgusting piles. It was the most vile and nasty thing I'd ever seen in my life. I realized these were killed animals that someone had to have put in there. The horror that someone would have done this was even scarier than finding the things in there. When I got home, my dad took care of this by contacting the authorities. The theory was that someone was killing animals and then storing the bodies inside of the camper. There was all sorts of nasty, decayed matter in there, but there was nothing to indicate who might have been doing it. I remembered that children with conduct disorder, who later may develop into psychopaths, often start their careers by killing or torturing animals. It always scared me to think if this person, whoever did this, ever upgraded to people. Number 4. Cannery. I only had one real friend growing up, and his name was Tim. We lived pretty close to each other, and were the only kids our age in that area. Neither of us ever moved, so we spent all of our time hanging out with each other, at home, and at school. There was so much that we did, riding bikes, exploring, playing video games, and many other things. When we were teenagers, once we wanted to spend the weekend playing video games, but I had some family over, and they were using the family room to sleep in. They had all their stuff set up in there, so we really couldn't go in there and play games. We were around 14 at the time, so riding bikes wasn't something that we did as much as when we were younger. But we weren't sure what else to do, so we went out. There was a river that passed through our town, but it wasn't a major one. Past out of town, a lot of area along it was wooded and off limits to people. We rode our bikes along the road, totally bored out of our minds. So we decided to ride through the woods and get to the river. When it got too hard to ride our bikes on that hard ground, we got off and walked the bikes. It was the middle of summer, so it was hot, and the trees and bushes were thick with leaves. We eventually got to the river, and we were following it at that point. We were out for a while before Tim noticed something. There was some sort of really old, rusted building on the side of the river. He began running up to it, really interested in what it was. When we got closer, there were signs that told us this was a cannery at one time. Not that I had any idea what that was anyway. But we left our bikes out and decided to check it out. It took a little while, but we couldn't find a way in at first. That was when Tim got the idea to break out one of the windows. I wasn't very keen on the idea, but I didn't stop him from doing it, so in retrospect, I was just as guilty as he was. But he broke out a window, and we climbed into the place. The inside of that place was terrifying just to be in. There were tons of old equipment in there, and it was just rusting away. The smell was quite unique as well. I had never encountered anything like it, but we were both really fascinated by it. There was weird graffiti on the walls, some weird devil worship stuff which gave me the creeps, but I figured that's the sort of thing teenagers do, so I tried to just keep my fear to myself. I really didn't want Tim to make fun of me for being scared. We were walking and suddenly, out of nowhere, heard this really startling noise. It was loud and abrasive, and it took us a moment to realize that some of the machinery had turned on. Both Tim and I immediately were scared, wondering how that could have happened. Neither of us had touched anything yet. Tim insisted going over to the machine and checking it out. I wish that we hadn't, though. There was no explanation at all as to why this machine turned on. Plus, I didn't even know what it was. But the scariest part to me was the conveyor belt to the machine. We found bones on it, and many of them were way too big to be the bones of fish. We began wondering exactly what had been being canned in that cannery. There was another sound that the two of us heard. It was a blood-curdling wail coming from further inside the cannery. It was impossible to tell what may have been making that noise, but I wasn't staying any longer. I told Tim he could look around if he wanted to, but I was getting the hell out of that place. I'm not too surprised that he agreed with me. We hurried back to the window, climbed out, and found our bikes. I'm not sure if either of us had ridden that fast before. Between the machine turning on and the wail that we heard, we assumed someone or something was in that old cannery, and it was best that it didn't find us walking around inside. Hey all, Killer Orange Cat here. First I want to thank all my paid Patreon members, starting with 2 of my 3 VIPs, the third one I'll mention at the end. Chiamerah Cat, Pixie Hopper 8. I also want to thank Heidi H, Chronic J, Stinky News, EricaOdd, Tracy Sellars, Kelli, Clark, and Broken Angel. I really hope you like these stories. I really enjoy these ones, and I've been trying to do things a little bit differently. Yes, all these do take place in rural areas, so I'm not getting totally away from that yet, but hopefully that's alright, because, hey, abandoned buildings in scary areas can be pretty bad too. And I do want to apologize to everyone on Patreon. I know I'm not the greatest at keeping up with it, and I am working on it. I will have stuff up for you, because especially for the people who you pay for stuff up there, which means I need to be giving you more content. I'm sorry, I will find a way to rectify that. I apologize. But just keep an eye on that in case you want, and I can always update my posts on the community YouTube when something goes up. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please hit the subscribe button and the bell if you'd like to be notified of new content. Leave me a comment, which I'll do my best to get back to, and consider sharing the video with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you want narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please send it to the address included in the description. And now, I'd like to mention all my free Patreon members: Anthony Bowers, Remi, Venikins, Rose Metro, Woofer McWooferson, Cindy Cleveland, Vanapira Rayne, William H., Alien Unicorn 13, Kathryn Lynch, The Bama Guy 334, Michael Vasquez, Bonnie Lind, Collet Bond, Krista Pike, Prince UVA, HF Creations, Bonnie Gibbs, Linda Moore, DJ Lira, Evil Black Cat, Lori Hicks, Lisa Herman, Krystal Robin, Hillbilly 13, RhettSchall, John Tull, Baby and Baby, Sherry Hubbard, Vina Waldren, Whiteybird the Rooster, and my third VIP, Pumpkin Moo, and Pepper 2. But in the meantime, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet, and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.